In the Soviet Union, owning a car was the dream of millions, but shortages turned buying one into a long and painful process. So people found another way. Starting in the late 1950s, homemade cars began to appear all across the country. What began as a handful of rare experiments soon grew into a mass movement, and entire clubs of enthusiasts. But how did the government react to these machines? Were you actually allowed to drive them on public roads? Could someone even produce a small batch of their own cars? And finally, which of these homemade creations turned out to be better than serial Soviet models, and sometimes even foreign ones? In this video, I'll tell the story of this unique phenomenon and show you the most incredible creations built by Soviet inventors. The DIY car movement in the Soviet Union had two very different paths. For some, it was driven by a simple desire to own any kind of car at all. No concern for aesthetics or groundbreaking engineering. The main thing was that it could move and provide at least a minimum of comfort. Others, more creative and often wealthier enthusiasts, aimed much higher. For them, a homemade car was a form of self-expression, a platform for experimentation, and a chance to build something truly unique and beautiful, often surpassing mass-produced models. And while for the first group, a DIY car was indeed the only realistic way to obtain personal transport, the second group was much more complex. First of all, they had to be relatively well off. Since building a proper homemade car usually consumed as much money and time as it would take to buy a brand new factory-made vehicle. Second, they needed at least some technical base, a workshop or space to carry out such work, as well as access to spare parts and components. After all, in the USSR there was a shortage not only of cars themselves, but also of the parts for them. Producing an engine, or say, a gearbox in a garage setting was virtually impossible. Without access to scarce components, starting such a project was simply pointless. And third, beyond all that, anyone who took on such a task needed a sense of taste and proportion. Otherwise, the result would hardly be a car worth looking at. In the 1960s, the homemade car movement in the USSR was rapidly gaining momentum and soon became a truly mass phenomenon. The magazine Technology for the Youth even developed special technical guidelines for homemade vehicles. These were advisory in nature and intended for those who wanted to build a car but didn't know where to begin. Meanwhile, the magazine Modalist Constructor started publishing detailed articles about DIY cars, including blueprints and step-by-step assembly instructions. Across many cities, clubs and workshops for teenagers began to emerge, where young people could build homemade cars under the guidance of mentors. The state encouraged this activity as it improved technical literacy among the youth and fully aligned with the country's ideology. Around the same time, the first rallies and exhibitions of homemade cars were organized. It was then that the term Samavto, short for Samodelni Avtomobili, homemade cars, appeared, eventually becoming a household name. By the early 1970s, the movement had grown so large that the government had to define its official stance. While authorities had never opposed homemade car builders, on the contrary, they supported them. The question now was how to formalize and regulate the phenomenon so that it would bring more benefits than potential harm. Fortunately, the government took a favorable position. An official procedure for registering homemade cars was introduced. Builders had to pass a technical inspection and obtain a safety certificate from a commission. If everything was in order, the car received official documents, license plates, and was allowed on public roads without restrictions. Now it's time to take a closer look at some of the most interesting homemade cars and their inventors. One of the brightest examples of the early Samavto era was a car built in 1956 by Arkady Babich from Leningrad. The car was given a symbolic name, Leningrad. It looked truly impressive. A wide, low-slung body, sculpted fenders, plenty of chrome trim, and a stylish two-tone paint job. In terms of craftsmanship, the body was on par with factory-produced cars of the time. Under the hood sat a 3.5-liter inline six-cylinder engine producing 90 horsepower, paired with a 3-speed manual transmission. In 1959, the magazine Behind the Wheel reported on the car, noting that its creator drove it on a long-distance run from Simferopol to Leningrad, 2,125 kilometers in just 20 hours. For many years, the car's fate remained unclear. A few years ago, what was left of the Leningrad surfaced for sale. It was no longer running, missing its original engine in several parts, with a body badly corroded by rust. It seemed the story of the homemade cabriolet had come to an end. But fate had other plans. The car was purchased by enthusiasts in Latvia, and not only saved, but fully restored, bringing the Leningrad back to its original appearance and giving it a well-deserved second life. In 1977, Yerevan engineer Rafik Ordian built an impressive coupe, the GT77. Inspired by Italian sports cars, he designed a sleek fastback with a long hood, hidden headlights, and gull-wing doors. The interior was unusually well finished for a DIY car. Power came from a modest 45-horsepower Skoda 1201 engine, while the suspension and transmission were borrowed from a Moskvich 412. With such a small engine, the GT77 wasn't fast. Its top speed was just 130 km an hour. Still, thanks to its fiberglass body and solid technical execution, the car earned several all-union awards. Unfortunately, its fate remains unknown, and most likely the vehicle has been lost. A few years later, in 1982, Moscow mechanic Vladimir Mishchenko created a sports coupe called the Mercury. The car was built on an original tubular frame with suspension and running gear from a Lada 2106, while the body was clad in fiberglass panels. Unlike many DIY projects, the Mercury turned out to be relatively simple to build, which allowed small-scale production. 5 cars were made in total, and some of them still exist today. That same year in Moscow, another remarkable project appeared, the Una by engineer Yuri Algebristov. This wedge-shaped 2-door coupe, based on GAZ-24 and GAZ-14 components, featured a lightweight fiberglass body with aerodynamic lines. It could reach 200 kilometers per hour, an almost unbelievable figure for a Soviet car of the time. What made the Una truly special was its constant evolution. Originally styled like a 1970s Italian sports car with a sharp nose and hidden headlights, it was later redesigned with a more modern look and upgraded mechanics, including BMW components. But Soviet DIY enthusiasts didn't just build sports cars. One of the most unusual projects was the massive sedan Lenina Khan, created by the Armenian engineer Makrich Pogosyan. It was striking not only for its sheer size. While most homemade cars were compact, this one looked like a full-fledged limousine. Even more impressive was the way it was built. All the body panels were hand-shaped from steel, hammered out on a 20mm thick metal plate. Each part was first drawn in full scale, then cut as a blank, and only then painstakingly hammered into its final form. The amount of patience and skill required was enormous. Nothing is known for sure about its mechanics, but the Volga wheels suggest it may have been based on GAZ components. The car's last public appearance was in 2017, and surprisingly, it still looked to be in good condition. Another remarkable project came from Minsk, a car aptly named Fantasia, Fantasy. Unlike many other builders, its creator wasn't a wealthy engineer, but an ordinary man with an ordinary salary and an extraordinary determination to own a car. He used whatever parts he could get his hands on, rather than those he wanted. The car had a tubular steel frame, aluminum body panels, and an engine from a Zaporozhets. The build took 4.5 years of evenings, weekends, and vacations. In total, it cost 2,100 rubles, when a brand new Zaporozhets cost 3,500. By 1973, his dream had come true, and the car was complete. Amazingly, both the Fantasy and its owner are still alive and regularly take part in retro rallies. And in the Ukrainian city of Sumy, engineer Nikolai Doroshenko built his own budget supercar, called the Murena. Its donor vehicle wasn't even a Zaporozhets, but a tiny motorized carriage. The fiberglass body was clearly inspired by the French Matra Morena. The car featured trendy pop-up headlights and a unique design solution. Instead of doors, it had a tilting canopy that included the roof and windshield. Sadly, nothing is known about its fate today. The most famous Soviet homemade car was the Pangolina. It was built in 1980 by Alexander Kuligin, an engineer by training and electrician by profession, from the town of Ukhta in northern Russia. The car stood out immediately. A wedge-shaped body with sharp lines, pop-up headlights, and a canopy that lifted entirely instead of doors. This feature, and its resemblance to the armored pangolin animal, gave the car its name. It was built on a tubular frame with fiberglass body panels. In 1981, Kuligin brought the Pangolina to Moscow. The car appeared on television and in magazines, quickly becoming known across the country. To many, it looked closer to a European supercar than to a typical Soviet vehicle, even though technically it was made entirely from standard Lada components. During the 1980s, the Pangolina took part in rallies and exhibitions, including the International Expo 85 in Plovdiv, Bulgaria. To get license plates and permission to travel abroad, the car had to be fitted with extra headlights, mirrors, and more conventional wheels. In the mid-1990s, the car was damaged in an accident and later rebuilt. The Pangolina's fame also shaped Kuligin's career. He received offers from Lada and Moskvich and worked at Moskvich for several years, though his unconventional ideas were never adopted. Later, he emigrated to the US, where he started producing kit cars. In 2004, Alexander tragically died in a road accident. As for the Pangolina itself, its trail fades in the late 2000s. It was displayed for some time in a private collection and in the museum of a Russian automotive magazine. But after the museum closed, the car's fate became uncertain. The cars shown in this video are only a small part of the whole picture. At the peak of the movement, up to 2,000 homemade cars were officially registered every year in the USSR. But by the late 1980s, new regulations made registration much more difficult. And in the 1990s, the flood of imported used cars all but ended the Samavto era. Enthusiasts remained, but the scale was nothing like before. And in the 1990s, young people's interests changed a lot. Becoming a cosmonaut or an inventor was no longer fashionable. That's it for today. Thanks for watching until the end. Now it's your turn. Tell us in the comments if there were similar enthusiasts and unique homemade cars in your country. Subscribe, leave a like, and share the video with your friends so we can bring you even more stories like this.